Please subscribe to hear more Cryptid Tales. If you like the story you heard, give us a thumbs up and feel free to leave us a comment. If you'd like to hear your own cryptid encounter on Cryptid Tales, send us an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com.
I wish to remain anonymous, as per my standing within the area I live and being part of the National Guard. I have grown up hunting and been in the woods my entire life. I know every creature, or at least I thought I did, in the area that I live and hunt in. I had just got home from my initial Army training. I got back in time to go turkey hunting in my favorite spot. I had gotten into my blind, one I had made from natural brush and shrubbery, at around 5:30 in the morning. I had applied my last spray down of scent killer and applied face paint to break up my face, and got into a comfortable sitting position to wait for daylight to come in. It was about 7 a.m., and the sun was coming up, allowing me to see the open field in front of me and the woods behind and to the left and right. The woods behind me were around 200 yards out from my position. The left-hand side to the back is about 300 yards to the top left corner and about 170 to the bottom left. The top right corner is about 150 yards and the bottom right is about 100. I looked over to the right side of the field and saw a couple of deer making their way out of the bottom right corner. I figured it wouldn't be long before the turkeys would be coming down from their roost. I was just about to hit my box call when I saw both deer raise their heads up behind them. They seemed to be on edge about something. I knew it wasn't me because I hadn't come from that direction, and I was downwind from them, so I knew they couldn't have smelt me. I looked back to the corner they had come from and the direction they were looking and thought maybe they had heard something and it just startled them. I decided to wait on calling anything to see what they were going to do. As I observed them, they seemed to just be a bit skittish, which told me a predator was probably near. My first thought was a bear, as I have seen them on the game camera I had put out. I knew if a predator was out right now, the hunt would be over, and I would be done for the day. I had been watching these deer for about the past 30 minutes, and knew they were probably about to leave the field and get back into the cover of the woods. I took one more look to the corner which the deer came out of, and saw a big black figure lurking at the edge of the woods. I was absolutely taken back by the immense size of this creature. I pulled my binoculars up to my eyes and felt my heart begin to race. What I saw, I still can't comprehend to this day. This creature stood 8 to 10 feet tall, I guessed, by the tree branches around its head, and what can only be a guess, had a weight of around 400 to 500 pounds or more. Its face looked human-like, but was scrunched up, with hair all around. The skull seemed to come to a point at the top. Its arms seemed to come down to the waist, and a little beyond, including the hands with hair covering every inch. Its legs were very muscular and covered in hair. I could only see what I guess would be its knees due to the grass being tall. I was a little worried because all I had on me was a .45 pistol and a 12-gauge shotgun with turkey loads. Nothing I figured could stop this creature if it chose to come after me. I thought time was flying, but this had only been 5 to 10 minutes. The creature looked over in my direction and I froze. This thing shifted its weight to one side and turned and walked back the way it came. After I saw it disappear into the woods, I quickly packed up my gear and left. To this day, I have only been to that location once since the incident, and have had rocks thrown at me and heard several loud groans or moans. I have not been there since. I don't know what it was that I saw, but it was nothing I had seen before. And only after watching your videos, I can only guess it to be a Bigfoot. My first encounter happened in the summer of '73, and a school buddy of mine, along with my little brother, went camping not far from my house. This was a place in the middle of a large field with 4 ponds in it we called the dynamite holes. That's because the holes were blasted out with dynamite when they were looking for oil several years ago. We decided to put our 2-man pup tent off to one side of the pond that we did most of our swimming in. There was another pond next to it that had a lot of weeds around it, so no one swam in that one. The bank was slightly elevated around the area that I had my sleeping bag, and the water around the pond was about 10 to 15 feet away. That was the weed pond, and it was to the north of us. The next pond was the one we swam in, and it was just off to the east of us. There were 2 other ponds nearby. One was northeast of the weed pond and had a small area that connected with the swimming pond, and another pond that was about 50 yards southwest of the campsite. Somewhere between 10 o'clock and midnight that night, everybody went to bed. I went into my sleeping bag with my head towards the weed pond so I could see the fire we had going about 5 feet from my feet. The tent was off to my left, about 20 feet or less. It was a clear night with hardly any breeze at all. I had my dog, and Mike, my buddy, had his also, and both dogs were lying just on the opposite side of the fire pit from me. The fire was getting low, and I was just about to fall asleep, but I could hear something walking around the west side of the weed pond, heading my way. It was coming up pretty fast, with long, heavy steps. I looked down at the fire because the dogs were growling and looking past me over my head. The footsteps stopped just as it got behind me. I knew the pond was 10 feet away from my head, so the thing was less than that to me. I couldn't move. All I could do was keep the sleeping bag hood over my head and keep watching the dogs. My plan was that if the thing tried to grab me, hopefully the dogs would jump up and scare it off. But all they did was stare at the thing that was behind me and growl, with their eyes as wide as silver dollars. But they never moved. After what seemed like 20 minutes, the thing went on its way around the pond, past the tent where the other 2 were sleeping, and out towards the open field. That's when I got out of the sleeping bag and went over to the tent to wake the others. Mike had his shotgun, but by the time they came out, it was too far away for a shot. Several hundred yards from the pond off to the east was a church, and they had lights in their parking lot. The field had been mowed not long before we went camping, so you could see the silhouette of what looked like a dog running in the field between us and the church. North of the field was several acres of woods, and that's where this thing was going. It was big, I mean real big, with long hair hanging from its long arms, and it was moving fast across the field, even though it was only walking. We just watched it go into the woods, and after that we grabbed all our gear and headed home. Well, that was the first encounter. A few weeks after the camping trip, I was at home. We had a house that was L-shaped, with a small storage room on the north side. Between the storeroom and the inside corner of the L was a concrete patio, and next to the storeroom was the sliding back door that went into the den/family room. It was about 9 or 10 at night, and I was getting ready to go to bed. I was in the bathroom that was next to the inside corner of the L, and it had a window that looked out onto the patio at the back of the house. The light was on next to the back door, so you could see everything that was on the patio up to the side of the storeroom. As I finished my shower and was drying off, I could see the full shape of someone standing at the back sliding door, looking into the den area where my dad was sitting. My dad was in his lounge chair, with his back to the door, watching the television that was on the opposite wall. Although the bathroom window had water on it from the steam, I could see that the thing looking in was bent forward in order to have its head low enough to be able to see in the house. This was a big person, both in height and bulk, and that was when I decided to wipe the window with my towel. I should have turned the light off in the bathroom first, but I didn't, and just as I started to wipe the window, it stood up. It looked at me, turned, and with one step was off the patio and around the storage room before I could get a good look at it. If I remember right, the size of the patio was 6 foot by 12 foot, so it had to take one step that covered about 5 feet to get off the patio. Anyway, I covered myself with the towel and went in the den where my dad was, thinking he may have fallen asleep with the TV on like he usually did. But he was awake in his chair, and I told him what I saw. He looked at me and said, "Yeah, I know. I could see the shadow from the back door on the floor in the den." I asked him what did he want to do about it, but he told me that there wasn't anything we could do. That was my second encounter. A few days after the second encounter, I was going to walk down the street and visit with a friend of mine named Greg. My house was about in the middle of the block on the east side of the street, and Greg's house was at the end of the street to the north on the west side of the block. That put it about 6 to 7 houses away. I can't remember the time, but it was dark outside, and the porch lights were on. The house across from mine, and just one house north, was a vacant home that some of the kids would go to, so we could smoke cigarettes and hide out from our folks. Maybe sneak a beer from home and drink it with our buddies. Well, after I walked out of the house, I could hear dogs barking from the other street behind the old vacant house. I didn't think much of it and started walking up the street to Greg's place. As soon as I made it past the old house, I heard the dogs, and they were going nuts. So I turned to see what it was that they were barking at. Just then, I saw this large thing that was in the backyard of the old house step over a 4-foot-tall high chain-link fence and started walking along the side of the house toward the street. I was about one house away by this time, and I could see that its head was even with the eaves of the house as it headed to the street. That caught my attention real fast. I kept walking towards Greg's house and looking behind me every second or so to keep an eye on that thing. It went to the street and started walking straight at me. I knew from all my hunting times that you don't want to run from a wild animal unless you have no other choice, because this may cause the thing to run after you like you're its food. So I started walking faster. But every time I looked behind me, the thing was getting closer and closer. I could see the long, big arms with long hair moving as it walked, and the steps it took were about twice as long as mine, so it was catching up with me. By this time, I was just about to start running because I couldn't walk any faster. Just as I got inside Greg's yard, I hit the gas and ran up the walk and in the house. I didn't waste time knocking or anything, I just wanted in. Everyone in the house came up to see what the problem was, and I started telling them what happened. Greg and me, along with my little brother, who was spending the night at Greg's house with Greg's little brother, all went out to see if we could see anything. The last I saw of the thing, it was about even alongside of a large tree in the yard next to Greg's house. We went over to the tree and looked around with a flashlight but didn't see anything. That house next to Greg's was also vacant and didn't have a porch light on. Looking at it now, as we were standing around the big tree trying to make sense of what happened, I remember the tree was swaying and moving a lot. However, for the life of me, I can't recall any wind blowing that night. In fact, I don't think there was any wind at all. Weird, isn't it?